Hello, everyone. Thank you and welcome to today's session of CERLL Research Circle. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Anna Bartosik, and the title of her presentation is Teacher Development in Digital Spaces, an invitation to explore the ethics of online research with a new lens. So Dr. Anna Bartosik, her work includes language learning and professional development research, teacher training and facilitation, instructional design, and teaching. She's a graduate from OEZ in the Language and Literacies Education Program. Anna works with George Brown College as a faculty member and as an secondment with the teaching and learning exchange to facilitate and promote faculty development. Thank you so much, Dr. Anna Bartosik, for presenting with us today. We look forward to learning a lot from your presentation. Over to you now.
Thank you, Aisha, and thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. This talk is going to take a walk through my doctoral research and the results of the study, and I'll spend some time about the considerations I made to conduct research in an online community and some ethics that I considered. If you have questions throughout, you could please put them into the chat. I may not answer them right away, but I know sometimes if you have a question, it's easier to just ask it and then focus on the rest of the conversation. So if I'm able to answer it at that moment, I will. But if the answer comes later on, I'll just delay, and we'll work through today's session that way. So the study focused on self-directed English language teacher development in digital spaces. And as I said, I'll include ethical considerations I made throughout the research process, and then spend a bit of time at the end reviewing the ethics of online research involving human participants. So perhaps first a bit of context and something about me, although you heard the introduction. I'm a faculty member in Ontario College, working as an English language teacher, instructional designer, curriculum developer, faculty developer, and even a researcher. This is a screenshot of my Twitter profile that was taken as I was completing my dissertation. And Twitter is where I conducted my research. I was interested in Twitter first as an educator. I wanted to get inspired with my teaching, and as I used the site and learned about it and I made connections with other colleagues, I began to wonder if other language teachers experienced the same learning that I had, which guided and piqued my research interest. The overarching goal of the study was to investigate how English language Twitter chats are designed, how English language teachers experience self-directed PD through Twitter chats, whether the ELT chat experience differs for influencers and lurkers, and to what extent participation in chat influences English language teachers beyond Twitter. So the first ethical consideration that I wanted to focus on is it ethical to study publicly available social data. And in an ethnographic study, it is possible always to return to revisit the original data long after it was produced. So one challenge is that participants do not know when they are being observed, or if their activities are being observed after a period of time. So there aren't necessarily clear-cut answers, but it is more ethical if the research use on the platform itself is allowed, that the group that's being researched is an open group and not a closed group. The discussions are archived publicly, and that discussions are indexed on the open web. But these decisions are all iterative. Each context should be considered every time a study is conducted and at every stage of a study. So in my case, an ethnography is the methodology I chose, which is a type of ethnographic research conducted online where researchers analyze the interactions, behaviors of individuals within specific online communities. And these communities can also exist in person. It involves a combination of qualitative and quantitative research methods, sometimes including things such as participant observation, interviews, surveys, which I did not do, and content analysis. So the researchers typically observe and record online discussions, track user behaviors, analyze the content of online postings, all to gain insights into the culture and norms of the community being studied. So ethnography provides a unique opportunity to study the behavior of individuals in online communities, which can be challenging to observe in real world settings. This was a mixed methods ethnography, and because an ethnographic study has no physical set space, I elected to use chat hashtags as the perimeter for the study, which drew data from Twitter's API from the end of October of 2020 to the end of January 2021 from Canadian ELT chat and SIG TweetMeet, which were two English language teacher chats. And you can see that on the slide, Canadian T-Chat did have a public collection of all their chats, and all the TESOL affiliates that are listed or shown, their icons are shown on the screen, provided summaries of each chat. SIG TweetMeet did not have a public collection or summary of their chats, but it was started as a special interest group from IATEFL. And although there was no weekly summary, it was supported by IATEFL. So these were some considerations I made to choose these two chats to examine. So another ethical consideration, should a researcher creep their research space? Should they remain as a complete observer or silent? So it is possible in ethnography to remain that way. But the use of ethnography in research is common when the goal is to gain a more comprehensive understanding of a particular social context and the social worlds that are created and maintained with others, as well as the interpretation of these worlds. So both the researcher's role as an observer and as a participant pose challenges when conducting this type of research. So when the researcher is a participant, one of the challenges is whether to reveal the research purpose to the participants and risks compromising the authenticity of the data. There are different stances a researcher can take when conducting ethnographic research, including being a complete participant, or a participant as an observer, or an observer as a participant, or a complete observer, and each of those has its own challenges. Conducting ethnographic research on Twitter or other social media platforms raises ethical issues because it is easy to take that complete observer stance. So it's important for the researcher to understand the group being researched, and questions of ethics arise when deciding whether to reveal the research purpose to participants. And since I was known to both groups of Twitter chats, I made my intent to research clear to both groups. And on the slide here, you can see how I made that my intentions clear, so that it wasn't a surprise to anyone, and that I was not lurking in communities where I am sometimes a participant. So the theoretical framework of actor network theory, landscapes of practice, affordances, and posthumanism was selected to address this interdisciplinary study. Although landscapes of practice only came into play in the study when chat participants displayed signs of the knowledgeability that Wenger, Trainer, and Hutchinson referred to as they demonstrate moving across landscapes that are beyond the ELT's area of knowledgeability. So outside the realm of what is traditionally considered language teaching expertise. The study also adopted a posthumanist lens and actor network theory to understand how technology and non-human actants impact learning in online spaces, and also account for the agency of the network and other non-human actants in directing or promoting learning. So through actor network theory, all the actants in the network are given the same agency, and the network is not activated until an actant engages it. This could be a hashtag, this could be a person, this could be a URL, it could be the Wi-Fi turning on. The study also incorporates the concept of affordances to differentiate between human and non-human actants, and the posthumanist lens is used to understand how the learner observed is socially constructed and entangled with the other non-human elements, and how users navigate the platform to personalize their learning. So in terms of the application of actor network theory, which pertains to human and non-human actants, affordances, as you can see in that space between landscapes of practice and actor network theory, lies in the definition of there are opportunities to act, but also depend on one's experiences, environment, and capabilities. So a human can perceive affordances and make choices based on all three of those elements, their experiences, the environment, and capabilities. But a non-human element can't. So the post-human lens is applied when addressing both the non-human actants and the new ways of understanding the social and material as not fully separate from each other, but that their actions are sort of like the dynamism of their entangled relationship. In the literature review, it established 4 elements that found a need for self-directed professional development. That first of all, there's a lack of funding on a global scale for professional development. Employers' needs are not the same as an employee's needs, and so sometimes the professional development offered isn't useful for the educator. Contract faculty, or in other parts of the world, they're called different things, but people who don't have full-time teaching positions are not often a part of the community that is encouraged or funded to partake in professional development. And also outdated training for in-service teachers who maybe learned things a long time ago, but their learning has become outdated or in some cases even dangerous to the learner. So one thing that I also noticed was that little study has been undertaken into how and why professionals employ social media platforms to build learning networks, to share professional ideas, and engage in collaborative projects. I took a look at different learning networks, personal learning networks, personal learning communities, communities of inquiry, and communities of practice. In the research on communities of practice, the focus is tied to reflective practice, and the importance of the learning is tied to the social cultural aspect, which this study attempts to move away from to focus on the socio-material aspects of learning, that learning is not only a social act, but it is also enacted with other non-human elements. Although the participants in the study called themselves sometimes a community of practice, for the most part, I referred to them as a personal learning network, a PLN, which was also a common term that participants in the study used to describe themselves. So in the 4 stages of data collection, I also investigated how the Twitter ecology supports and suppresses chat participants through the social material analysis of human and non-human assemblages, such as their tweets, the technology, and the communication mechanisms. So in stage 1, I used NodeXL to draw data from Twitter's API, and almost simultaneously, stage 2 was a chat analysis. And you can see in each stage the different types of tools I was using, either to collect data or to visualize the data. Stage 3 was a discourse analysis, and in stage 4 were participant interviews. 414 teachers participated in the 2 separate Twitter chats over the course of the 3 months. And 11 teachers participated in semi-structured interviews. So you see the little infographic to the right side that all of them had been teaching for more than 10 years. The majority of the study participants were based in Canada, and although some were based in the UK. You can also see that there is more than 11 little icons across the bottom, but that accounts for the fact that some of these people were material writers and teachers and working in different areas. So in the first stage, using social analysis and NodeXL produced these visual representations of the 2 English language teacher chats. So this first stage produced these visual representations, which allowed me to examine both the tabular and visual data. So on this page, you see the visual data. And it was important to focus on these patterns of communication, the topics being discussed, the connections in the network, and to identify the influencers and lurkers in the chats. So this graphic on the left side of 6 types of Twitter networks was helpful in determining whether the networks were unified or divided in silos, like the SIG tweet meet chat, and eliminates some of the false measurements of popularity in the network, such as the In-Hub and Spoke network on the bottom. You can see BCTO looks very popular, but it is just being mentioned. It's not participating in the chat at all. And the hashtags and the word pair analysis, so this was the tabular data, and not only identified initial influencers and lurkers, but indicated which elements of the chat should be examined next, so for further analysis. In terms of non-human assemblages, so hashtags were very important. That during the discourse analysis, it provided an opportunity for me to consider all the ways in which the hashtag has agency. It's not only a place for space for a chat to take place, but it's used to remind people of an upcoming chat. In the Canadian ELT chat, the top URLs that were used help build the case that the chat hashtag is also a channel for the community to utilize in order to share information and not just a place to meet. Hashtags, the use of hashtags also can be a demonstration of learning. So people would add hashtags to indicate other topics. Hashtags can be portals to other landscapes. So if I include, let's say, hashtag Canadian ELT chat and hashtag social justice, those two communities have an opportunity to meet together at that hashtag if someone's searching that hashtag and it comes up. There were also silent hashtags, hashtags that were used in people's profiles, or hashtags that people were searching but not sharing. And what I called the Lazarus hashtag, which was a hashtag that was brought back from the dead after years because someone retweeted something and used another hashtag. So all of these were the non-human assemblages related to hashtags. Another element that the actor network theoretical lens drew attention to was the power of weak links. So for example, the simple act of retweeting a tweet places the tweet into the feed of a different timeline with a different personal learning network. And those participants with weaker connections to the network are the ones who can spread that tweet to other communities, not the ones who are better connected, but it's the weaker ones that are able to share their message farther and encourage others to join. During the discourse analysis, the visual data helped reveal that the chat patterns, how people use Twitter chats, are often at odds with the intention of the tweeter. So the tweeter wants to be inclusive, for example, but the pattern of a chat often discourages newcomers because they don't understand how a chat works, where it moves from the most recent tweet down in a reverse chronological order. Whereas when people join a chat, you can see on the right side, they expect it to be a conversation like exchanging SMS messages with somebody. And so the pattern of the chat, even though chat moderators were practicing to be inclusive, just the pattern of the chat itself was being exclusive and preventing some people who weren't familiar with it from participating. The chat topics that you see here kind of in the middle of the screen: intersectionality, representation in ELT, sustainability in ELT, and LGBTQ+ in ELT. These were the chat topics that drew larger numbers to these chats than normal, and the chat topic as an actant increased teachers' agency to act. So despite any perceived limitations that I mentioned before about chat patterns or the Twitter platform, it drew larger numbers because people were motivated to join the chat and at least look at it and view it because of the topic. The analysis also recognized that chat moderators have a lot of agency and influence, which, for example, the Canadian ELT chat moderators attempted to diffuse by giving chat participants agency in choosing topics and questions in advance of a chat. As seen on the right side of the screen, they shared an anonymous Padlet for people to add questions and topics to discuss. So another thing that I had to make a decision about during my analysis, an ethical consideration, was about the chat with the topic of LGBTQ+ in ELT. The engagement in that chat came mostly from retweets and from likes, and very few chat participants engaged by tweeting. At this stage, it was a very interesting exchange, and I was torn. I remember talking to Enrica about it more than once, but in the end I elected to not explore the content of the LGBTQ chat because I had neither the consent nor the data that these chat participants would not be negatively affected by making their chat participation public. Many participants were joining in from parts of the world where their sexual identity is illegal or a fireable offense. Engaging in a chat about race and queerness is a conversation, and it is worthy of examination, but it was not the purpose of my study, nor did I let people know in the letter of consent that the chat topics could expose them. But those who were engaged in the chat may not have wanted to be identified in a published dissertation, since their engagement in the chat was in their personal space and on personal time. So this is an element of ethics in researching social media data, which is an important consideration. So although some researchers may not consider researching social media spaces like Twitter, another open space is, for example, Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn. They may not consider these spaces, this kind of research, to be unethical, and believe that participation in a public chat means that chat participants are aware their words are public. But there needs to be an awareness that people's right to be forgotten, especially if they're not working and they are on official work time or participating in research, must be respected, and each situation's ethical considerations should be assessed separately. So additionally, the number of non-permanent teachers participating in the chat and what part of the world they were joining from can affect an individual's unwillingness to be exposed. And my interpretation of whether a tweet is innocuous or not is not a valid reason to quote people who have participated in the chat, because my definition of innocuous is from a Western established teacher point of view who has a steady employment in ELT. And I might not be aware of all the considerations to bring into play to know whether this is a good choice or not. So these were all questions to consider, and ultimately the chat data is included in the network analysis, but I excluded it from the discourse analysis. Another interesting result from the study was the idea of silence, that it's not a display of someone not learning on Twitter. So there are a number of factors why people are silent on Twitter or other social media platforms. It could be the platform itself and the lack of affordances of that platform. It could be job precarity. It could be the topics that were being discussed and being visible during what can be labeled as sensitive chats. These can prevent people from visibly participating. Employment precarity, even people who had stable positions. For example, when anything on Twitter would come up related to PBLA for language instruction for newcomers to Canada, a lot of people avoided talking about it publicly because they were worried their employer might say something to them. So also new chat participants were always silent or more silent. Teachers who don't have the affordances of the topic of teaching, so they might be more quiet. Time zones prevented people from participating, but they would read the chat afterwards. And the last item was, I think, the most interesting, that people said they were learning, and so they didn't want to take away voice from the space of those who have more knowledge and need the space to share information. So dissemination of knowledge gained from the personal learning network on Twitter was sometimes demonstrated beyond the platform in terms of, for example, research publications, presentations at conferences, book clubs in workplaces, but it wasn't necessarily displayed on the platform where people were doing their learning. So the findings and implications in the study, I grouped into 4 categories here. The first category about contributions to the professional development field of language teachers. that these topics that were being discussed during this 3-month period of time that I examined them were beyond the topics of traditional language teacher education. And most definitely at the time of my research, TESOL programs, English language teacher programs, don't discuss race in ELT or don't discuss intersectionality in ELT. These are not subjects and topics, or maybe they are talked about obliquely, but here was a space for people to talk about it in a public forum with people from different venues. Another thing that was found was that people were learning and talking about topics before they became popular. So now we see a lot more conferences talking about race in language teaching, LGBTQ plus, inclusivity, intersectionality. But at the time of the study, it was just after the George Floyd murder and the Me Too movement. There were no conferences talking about these things. People found this a good place to go and learn in a space where they couldn't learn elsewhere. And also that the chat topics address the needs of language teachers who have been teachers for more than 10 years and who need to find a way to learn more outside their workplaces among people from other spaces. In terms of professional development on Twitter and other social media platforms, it was very interesting to see how informal learning brought new insights, such as how silence could be measured, how authentic forms of learning can be something as small as sharing a retweet, that dissemination occurs away from the social media platform, and that the study provided support for the validation of self-directed professional development. And then the methodological development of the study, the collecting analysis tools, especially around the use of social network analysis, cross-discipline, various applications and visualization, and the consideration that the study gave to the ethics of conducting online research and offline communities can't be underestimated. What isn't on this slide is the methodological contribution of conducting interdisciplinary research in an attempt to view learning as anything other than social mediation, that as people, we don't have the control we think we have over our learning. Sometimes we're aware that we don't have it, and sometimes we're not aware. We could be limited by the space we're in, by the type of device we're using, by the connection that we're in. But there are so many other factors in play that contribute and interfere with our learning that are beyond the social. So in terms of ethics for online research, many associations have guidelines, and there's not one best way to conduct research online, but for example, ethics in North America and Europe for online research is completely different. One place where North America lags significantly behind, ERA doesn't not differentiate between research conducted online or in person, and these guidelines have not changed significantly since 2011. I have the link to their guidelines here. Let me just see if I can share them in the chat. I checked this morning, and yes, they are still the same. So they were the same during my study, and they are still the same now. The British Psychological Society has very recently updated its guidelines for conducting research in internet-mediated spaces, and I'll share those with you as well. These are very up-to-date. They consider all sorts of elements for human participants, including the right to be forgotten and naming participants. And these comprehensive guidelines from the British Psychological Society also meet the standards of the Association of Internet Researchers, which was last updated in 2019. So I will share those with you in the chat as well. And there's one more that I will share, and that is from the Canada's Tri-Council's rules. So at the time of my research, they were not updated. There was talk of them being updated. and they have updated them in 2022, but they do not meet the same level of consideration as the British Psychological Society or the Association of Internet Researchers. Research in public digital spaces where privacy is not an expectation does not require REB approval, according to their Tri-Council policy statement. And I'll share that. That's in chapter 2. This is the last link that I'll share. So that's very problematic for several reasons, which I'll explore on the next page. In my own ethics application to the university, I had to outline a clear distinction between individuals who participate in Twitter chats and research participants. So I had to avoid the word participant when I talked about Twitter. The distinction wasn't clear enough, and the ethics board initially requested that I seek permission from all chat participants, which was not possible in both chats in the study. It wasn't until I explained how existing social media data was being collected and then research participants chosen for interviews that I was finally granted ethics permission at the university. So since social media platforms constantly evolve and new ones are added, guidelines for conducting research in these spaces need to be reviewed often. And because research participants can be in other parts of the world, what they consider data privacy and what we consider data privacy here in North America are very different. So there were other ethical considerations which my study considered. Why name participants? And the other one was the excuse me, was the idea of protecting anonymity. So in my case, I gave the choice to interview participants whether they wanted to be named in the dissertation. It was up to them if they wanted it. And the reason for that is quite a few of them are doing work that's important and is associated with their names. So I wanted to give them credit. So there were 3 interview participants who chose to have their Twitter handles used in the dissertation, but they are not used in any other way. So not in any presentations I've done, not anything I've written about my study, but only in the dissertation. And that is so that the work that they're doing, the important work that they're doing, isn't attributed to me and my dissertation, but is attributed to their names. In terms of protecting anonymity on a social media platform, it's not always possible, but you should be very explicit in your consent letter so that even though people are aware that their participation is public, you need to be clear how you're going to disseminate your research afterwards so that they can make a decision. Do I want, can you please anonymize me, just my name, or maybe my name and my work context, or maybe my pronouns. Please don't include my pronouns in my in your work. These are all things that should be explicit in your consent letter. And I was not explicit about the topics that were going to be discussed in my research. And so that is why I didn't use do a discourse analysis on the LGBTQ plus in the LT chat. I've noticed on social media platforms when people are asking now for research participants, they are warning potential research participants that, for example, the topic of this study is XYZ, and in the course of the study, your name or your thoughts might be shared and related to this topic. So they're even being explicit about it when they are trying to get some snowball sampling. So the things that I wanted to focus on just there and now is a more granular discussion about participant privacy, which indicates the decisions should be made at the researcher level based on the context that is specific to each separate research study and perhaps even each stage of the study. The question of anonymity and temporality is difficult to study. Temporality over time is difficult to study because there are privacy concerns with the right to be forgotten. The aging of information impacts a participant's willingness to share it. They may have changed their position on something and they don't want their previous thoughts to be shared. Observational data when the researcher is not the participant is problematic in terms of the interpretation of the data. There has to be a respect for participant autonomy with free and informed consent. Notwithstanding the free and informed consent, there's also the question of what obligation does the researcher have if the study participants' wishes are not addressed and then they want to be identified in the research. Does a participant's desire to be named in the research because they have a public persona that is part of the research trump privacy? Does the researcher then become the de facto author of that participant's ideas and words because the participant can't be named? Research ethic boards draw heavily on the observational model of ethics, but questions still remain. Are these digital spaces public? Can individuals be identified even if they are not named? What about things that researchers de-identify? Details can still be identifiable. Do participants have a reasonable expectation of privacy on a public forum? If participants are in a private space at home in their pajamas and they have a curated audience, then maybe privacy is subjective. So the attention of ethics needs to shift to how participation is defined. So for example, as Twitter users' purpose is for making connections, not making content for researchers. And I acknowledge that Twitter has changed since the time of my study, but all these ethical considerations are still valid considerations to be made. And some of them need to go above and beyond the guidelines that, for example, the Tri-Council policy statement has for us, or research ethics boards have, to protect our research participants from any known or perhaps potentially unknown harm that our research can cause now or down the road. And I'll stop here.